if there's no other question now, we can perhaps move on to the next talk. And François, you. Well, I have a lot of questions, but perhaps we can keep them for this afternoon. And so Barbara has now joined us. It's very early in New York, so we really thank you again for agreeing to join us at this early hour. And we'll blame it on our own techno-optimism, which blinded us, I guess, to the embodied material realities that we're actually still facing despite the Zoomification of everything. I'll introduce you again for those of you in the audience who were not here yesterday. So Barbara London is a New York-based curator and writer. She founded the Video Media Exhibition and Collection programs at MoMA in New York, where she worked between 1973 and 2013. She has lots of recent projects. She's been really present the past couple of years. Her current projects include the podcast series Barbara London Calling, which you can access on the website barbaralondoninoneword.net. She recently published Video Art: The First 50 Years last year with Phaidon, and that really was a big publishing event for anyone interested in video art. And she's also curating the exhibition Seeing Sound with ICI, Independent Curators International, which is running from 2021 to 2024. And she has, I'll mention again her website, barbaralondon.net/exhibitions, where you'll find a list of all her incredible, important work that she is going to address now. And so without further ado, Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for this wonderful organization. I got up, I have my coffee, and I'm ready to talk, to share with you a number of ideas. But first, I have to share my screen. Let me see if I can do this. Share sound. And here we go. And okay. You can still hear me? Okay. It's all coming. Okay. So maybe I'll go to the other view if I can, but if I can't, so what? Where's my projector thing? Here we go. Okay. I thought about a title for this and what's technology got to do with it. The emphasis often is on the technology, and in a way similar to what Hannah just did very brilliantly, it's really about the artists and their ideas and what they do with this. So I'll just say one word, my background. I'm from New York, and this was my view of the world. When I was growing up, this was the tallest building. To me, the US was New York, and I looked across to Asia. Very interested in Asia for many years. I like to put this up because MoMA in the 30s had this wonderful sign. It was actually an exhibition then, and it was about art in our time. And for an institution that's collecting as well as exhibiting, that is not an easy thing, because you've got to constantly take care of what you have in your collection. And if you're moving forward, you're going to have to make room, and you're going to have to learn a lot to figure out how to contextualize the new. And the new is, of course, of great interest to me and to many people. Oops, I'm going backwards. Go forward. Okay. So defining a medium, defining a field. I went into video in a way because it was wide open. And as I was in graduate school, my colleagues were doing Renaissance, and that's like counting the number of angels on the head of a pin. There's very little elbow room. So the new was wide open. when I started out then in the late 60s, early 70s, we had instant everything. We had instant photographs, that was new. We had instant orange juice, instant soup. We had audio tape, and we had interesting artists, visual artists, who were also really experimenting with music and technology and other things, like the group called Television. In case you don't know, when the consumer video camera first arrived in 1965, it brought real time, and many New York artists, several New York artists actually got their hands on a camera. It was Paik, it was Andy Warhol, it was Les Levine, Joan Jonas a year or two later. Now the camera, you can see, was maybe 15 pounds, and the take-up reel was also 15, 20 pounds. And you had to thread it the same way you threaded audio tape. And for a museum with an exhibition, that was an impossibility to exhibit. You could not have someone standing in the gallery, threading up the machine, having it play, and then rewind it and start it all over again. So that did indeed cause problems, although institutions with very eager contemporary curators were tracking what was going on. In New York, like in Berlin, like in Cologne, like in Paris, there were what we called alternative spaces. And that included in these cities that maybe were bankrupt in some cases, rents were very cheap or almost free in these abandoned spaces. And that's where many artists got together and did screenings of their new video, and they would arrive with a new cassette under their arm or new tape under their arm just made that day, or they would create an installation. Now you have to understand, in 1965, or late 60s, early 70s, we did not have projectors. Projectors were very expensive, video projectors at that point. And some artists, what they did to get a panorama was to bring together many TV sets and put them all on the floor, pile them up, and you got a critical mass that way. Just to show you, New York was bankrupt in the late 60s, and here's Tony Conrad, the wonderful artist, musician, riding his bicycle in a very dirty, filthy street. I was very interested in music from the beginning, and this is an event that would happen over 3 years at the Fillmore East. So you had very new technologies being used for the backdrop of performances. And this has always been of great interest to me, and I think Hannah touched on that it's not just one person who makes a work often. It's a collaboration, and in some cases, it was somebody who's good technically with a moving image, or capturing a moving image, or a live image, or then manipulating. And here we have, it's a very, what do you call it? Not kinetic, but yeah, in a way, it's hippie type imagery in the backdrop. Don't forget, technology happened in many, many, many ways. The most sophisticated was the US managed to get someone on the moon in '69. And this was all in the newspapers. And we go through love-hate relationships with technology. Remember, in '69, this was still the Vietnam War, and there were many artists who hated technology. It was the work of the devil. So because it was the corporation that was behind all of these developments, but yet it gave us a breath of air that there were all kinds of possibilities. And someone like a David Bowie did Space Oddity. And it's really, you could say, a couple of years later in '72, when he did the song and the music video, it was a music film, actually. Is it actually about the lunar landing, or is it about a drug trip? And this is what people often don't discuss. There were a lot of drugs being taken then, and I guess there still are today. As Hannah already did a beautiful conversation about Paik and his work and the conservation, for me, this is an interesting early image. It shows that Paik indeed, when he was growing up, did play the piano. And he did go to Europe from Japan. Of course, he's born in Seoul and did study music. And this is just to show you that even though we weren't jetting around the world, artists were moving around in certain capacities. And like the Locarno Video Festival, this Filkingham Electronic Music Center did performances, and these events were how artists like Paik and others came together and shared ideas about what they were doing. So you can see he's got all kinds of electronic gear, audio gear right there. So Paik was, I met him in 1973 on a bus, actually. And he was one of the most joyous, witty, funny, and eager for information. He read in like 4 languages, the newspaper most days. He was an avid reader. I like to show this because you don't have to have fancy equipment to make an artwork. And Paik took detritus, garbage, things thrown out, and he made an object that is sonic. It's meant for touching. Of course, when a museum acquires this, years later, you, the public, are not allowed to touch it. So how do we, as a curator at an institution, convey what this work is about and sounds like? You have to listen to earphones, or you have to watch a little video recording of it. And it's very important always, and Hannah touched on this, we have the aesthetics of a work, and that's what makes the work. That's what the artist intended. And we have your experience and my experience of a work. Now, our bad mood on that day we experienced it will flavor it in one way. So your experience is definitely going to be different from mine. And my memory is going to be different from yours. So how do we, as art historians or curators, deal with that? Do you take it with a grain of salt, what someone says? So Paik once was asked, how did you learn video? And he replied, I invented it. I had finished with electronic music, therefore I had to do something. I was neither a good painter, nor a sculptor, neither a good composer. There was no competition at that time. So that was what Paik said. And Hannah already did a great analysis of this work. I always like to mention that in 1963, Paik was indeed living in Germany, and you had an economic, maybe slight boom for Germany. Post-war, they had pulled up their socks and they were back with a somewhat strong economy. And Paik had, would pick up old discarded TVs. He would go into his studio and he would doctor them up. And this is the Zen for TV, which really is a doctored up TV set. And I also like to sometimes say that indeed it's minimal. And you can think TV, what was it then? Especially today, almost no young art students have a TV. They've got their phone and a laptop, presumably. So they don't rely on television for their news information, nor is it a buddy. When I was growing up, we had newscasters that were then on the screen, and those were our buddies in a way. Those were almost not part of the family, but they were, and that was how we got information. So in a way, this Zen-ish line then is it the glowing line? It's not a glowing TV screen, it's something else. And the same with the TV magnet. He doctored up the innards in 1965. And here you supposedly, as the public, would have been able to manipulate the magnet on top and then, just, further adapt or modify the image you saw. But of course, now you, the public, cannot touch this. And that's valid. But still, it's another experience of the work, looking at it purely as object or purely secondhand as to what the experience is like. Paik got, we've already mentioned, got one of the first portable video cameras in New York in 1967. And what did he do? He actually, I think he used a film camera to make an image, to capture the image of New York's mayor at that time, John Lindsay. And what he did was he captured Lindsay at a press conference where Lindsay is saying, okay, you can start recording. Okay, you can start recording. And in that moment, you've got Lindsay and all of his inherent tweaks or torques of gesture. So that's an image of the mayor that you get to see in the kinetoscoped video that then became available. And then of course it's shown on a monitor, which is very intimate. So you've got Lindsay, his head, and you're looking at him in kind of direct relationship to you. So I sometimes point out that you could say in 67, not that they were buddies or anything, but you could say, this is quasi a portrait, a temporal portrait of the mayor. And in a way, what Andy Warhol did was also in capturing images of very well-known personas like Marilyn Monroe, and using very industrial technologies like silkscreen to make an artwork of this very iconic figure. And you could say, you couldn't really say either one is a portrait, but you could say they're portrait-like, or they're making a statement. And Hannah already indicated, Paik had a very messy studio where he did all of his experimentation, and you never knew if you went to do a studio visit what you were going to find. But he was always so excited about what he was working on, what he had just developed. 1970, we had a very important book by Gene Youngblood come out. The world of video and the world of film were quite separate. I think they, each artist in each camp eyed the other one, worried that the film video, maybe the filmmakers really worried, I think in New York, that video would take away all the federal and state funding for art, for the art practice of the moving image. But Gene Youngblood, God bless his soul, really went in deeply and analyzed what the moving image in its expansion was. And he treated them both with dignity and kind of equally. So TV with Candle, and I won't go into this because I've already talked about Paik and the TV. And so here he took out the innards, put in a candle. So it's like a memento mori. What is knowledge? So at that point in 68, was knowledge, what's coming off the TV? Is knowledge something that sits in you, the viewer? And like life, we're here fleetingly, and like this candle. I was fortunate to first put the TV Buddha in MoMA in a project show. So here's the Buddha looking at, we assume, a live image of the Buddha. He's staring at his own image. And it's almost like a video koan. What's the difference between a live and a pre-recorded video image? Is there a difference? Of course there is. And the only way you, the viewer, know whether this is live is if you put your hand in front of the camera. So in the US, Bruce Nauman, quite a hermit, worked with a video camera that he had. And Bruce in 69 had already been doing a lot of experimentation in his studio with Super 8, and was really thinking about the artist, in a way, what the artist does, what the artist can do. So here, this video, which you would have seen on a monitor, the same scale as your head, and here he is, kind of gross, not really, but it's an abstraction in a way. The camera in recording was upside down. It's just from his upper lip down to below his chin. And he's got big headphones on, and he's hearing himself in a slight delay say lip sync, and he repeats it for 1 hour. Why 1 hour? Because that's the length of a videotape at that point. So he's repeating, repeating, repeating. I used to make my students see the whole thing. I don't do that anymore. They would go up the wall. But I would try to explain that as he's struggling to say exactly what he just said, you get caught up in his flaws, how he stumbles, and then it's almost like when you hear a Steve Reich composition, the repetition, you get into the beauty of that, and it takes maybe some patience. Nauman did indeed make single channel, in quote, videos, and he did experiment with, in quote, installation. So many of you may have seen this. This is the live taped corridor where you would walk down the middle. It was very narrow. It really made you feel the physicality of your body because it's tight. So you're walking down the corridor and you see two monitors. They're of the corridor you're actually going down. And then all of a sudden you realize one is pre-recorded image, the other is live, but it's the back of your head and there's a camera at the entry. And it means even if you're a narcissist, you still can't see your face. All you can see is the back of your head. You can never turn around fast enough. So he's capturing a lot of that in this work. Artists were thinking about what is television and broadcasting and the live. So I like to show this of Valley Export facing a family. So it's a video of a live television event, and it's a family, an ordinary, I guess, Austrian family. So this would have been, and of course in Austria at that time, there were not so many TV channels, but if you were flipping your dial, this would have been quite surprising to come upon. 3/4 inch cassette, we don't sometimes remember. This is really what allowed video as art to take off. It meant that a curator like me didn't have to thread up a machine. We could take several works, assemble them on one cassette, and then that would play nonstop, maybe in the gallery. Or an artist could put a work on the tape and then put it in a little mailer and then send that out to a writer or a curator. So this was the dissemination of information when it made some exhibitions and screenings really possible. We didn't have the internet like what we're doing here, where you either physically had to be there for the presentation or you sent the work ahead. Now we're doing it in Zoom. Vito Acconci also worked with himself and did actions that was really, had duration, sometimes for the viewer, felt quite trying in the way it was imposing in a way on you. And this is Joan Jonas with her vertical roll. She took a flaw in the then television and then does this very, very elegant, beautiful, stop this too loud. Whoop. Anyway, so yes, so that's a very important early work of Joan's. And in 1975, that's on another slide, I was able to acquire from MoMA 5 artists, early videos, 1975. So Joan, Nauman, Wegman, Peg, I forget who the fifth was. It's one. Anyway, I always am interested in what artists are doing, how they're working. So here is Stena Basulka, who with her husband Woody co-founded The Kitchen with a number of other artists. Sometimes that's not mentioned. So here is Stena, a classically trained violinist who, like Joan with the flaw of the vertical roll, here Stena is manipulating the image according to her bowing of her violin. And that was tricked out by her husband, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, who was a great technician and a great artist. Oh, there it is. So, as I said, MoMA acquired its first artwork, Peg, Jonas, Nauman, Wegman, Stena. And 2 years later, I got a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, and I started something called Video Viewpoints. So, as I said, in 75, there was still the holdover of some artists downtown who thought MoMA was imperious, was narrow-minded, was many things. And I was always trying to get artists to come uptown. I would go downtown to see their work, but I was always trying to get artists to come uptown. And one way was for me to create this lecture series where they really, it was as much a screening and presentation, and it was a sharing of information. Most of these talks, I think there were now, by the time I left, there were over, I don't know how many hundreds, but the very first year we had Stena, Vito, Bill Viola, Beryl Carrot, and Bruce Alpert, John Alpert, a documentarian. I was always interested in a broad picture of what video was and is. Oops, I don't need to show that again. I learned from artists and always asking questions. So I met Bill Viola around this time, 1975, and at that point he was so excited. He played drums in high school. So for him, image and sound are pretty much equal, and he pays equal attention to both in constructing a work. So here he's creating the system for the talking drum. And I should mention, he was the assistant to Namjoon Paik in 1973 at the Everson Museum in Pike's show. I think it was 73. And here he is in an empty swimming pool performing his talking drum. So Bill was very interested in acoustic spaces and what he could do with them. So here you can see he's got like a Buddhist drum, and he was making sound with that. I was able to put Bill's work, He Weeps for You, in MoMA in the projects. It's at that point he called his installations tuned environments. So you had the public come in, stand in front of this illuminated drop, which is coming down from a spigot. The camera captures that image, projects it on the wall upside down. No, not upside down. You are shown upside down. So the drop slowly, slowly, slowly gets bigger, and then it falls down on this little drum. There's a microphone underneath, and it makes the biggest boom you can ever imagine that fills the space. So you're shocked out of your socks by this loud sound. So here's a close-up of the drum. The little drum. So Bill's first trip to Japan was 1976 for a conference that Jorge Glusberg from Argentina organized. Bill came back and was so enthusiastic about what he had seen. I then got a grant from Matsushita. I got my grant was $5,000. I got myself over to Japan. I selected about 20 artist videos. I created a show, and that show was at MoMA. Then it went to 15 other museums. And that's what I did pretty much single-handedly with one intern at that point. And all of this was done for $5,000, the catalog, everything. So if you want to read that early text that I wrote, it's, you know, old, but it's on my website. Now MoMA has been releasing its catalogs after a certain period, and you can download. So around 1980, I can't remember. I mean, Lorenzo could tell me. I went around 1980 on the invitation to Rinaldo Bionda, and I went to the Locarno Video Festival, and that was very important for me because, as I said yesterday, I had been going to. I went to Project 74. I went to early Documenta in the 70s. I met artists that way. I did my research. But to be at Locarno, a very young Chris Durkheim was there, René Berger, curator Helmut Friedel, Liliana was there, and many artists. And I was a kind of sponge for information. And Locarno was a very important place for me to meet and kind of hang out with people. It was wonderful. So I don't want to go over too long. I'm going to keep an eye on the time. So identity politics has been big for a long time. So I'm just going to show you a few slides of artists whose work I've followed. Lisa Steele, based in Toronto, birthday suit, that's you naked, that's what you're born with, right? So what she did within her very 20 or so minute video, she goes down her body and pans every scar from a bike accident, from a burn on her hand, whatever. And that's her autobiography in a way. Martha Rossler, many of you know, I got it into MoMA. Semiotics of the Kitchen in 75, we had, in the US anyway, what I call our cookery TV shows. We had Julia Child teaching us French cooking. So Martha is taking French, the idea of French semiotics, the idea of these cookery shows, and she's going from A to Z of all the utensils in her kitchen. And it goes from A, apron, B, bowl, knife, and she she slashes. So there's a little bit of anger in there, but also it ends with a little bit of humor. Another artist, very important, Lynn Hirschman, doing her whole body of work called Roberta, where she creates, in quote, an alter ego. Roberta, she got Roberta a social security number and a driver's license. So Roberta, in fact, was Lynn, but was this kind of fictive narrative entity. Dara Birnbaum, really exploring, examining how women are represented in these soap operas and TV shows. Most of the women portrayed on TV at that time were the image of men. So the male gaze, these soap operas were pretty much all directed by men. So Dara is deconstructing that through Wonder Woman. Sani Ivajkovic, who I also had the good fortune to meet, I think in the 70s, when she and her then partner, Dalibor Martinez, were in transit going to LA to Long Beach Museum for a residency. So this is her also working with female identity and what magazines through their advertising make us try to buy, like lipsticks and everything. But here we just see Sonia from torso to neck. I was lucky to meet Annabella Geiger, an important artist who has a long career in printmaking, but got a hold of a camera, which was very unusual in Brazil at that point. It was illegal to have a consumer camera at that point in Brazil under the dictatorship, but she's working with the map of Brazil, of Latin America. So she plays on words in this piece of, so it's called Mapas Elementar. Another Brazilian artist, very important, Sonia Andrade. So again, very feminist, very, you could say in a way, there's a bit of anger in there. She's hammering nails between her fingers. Mako Idemitsu in Tokyo, another day in the life of a housewife. So playing on what the role, the traditional role, the conventional role. And then a very important artist who, thank goodness, recently has been getting more recognition is Howardina Pindell, who did her video in 1980, Free, White, and 21. So I encourage you all to take a look at this, because for 1980, it's a very strong work about being a Black artist of color, going to Yale and making it very slowly, but she makes it in the art world. So yesterday I said, I think my second trip to Locarno, I went with Laurie Anderson, which was quite wonderful. I had already at that point done this project show with Laurie, and where through bone conduction, the visitor came in, put their elbows on the table, and then heard Laurie, because underneath in here were transducer, two transducers, and a audio cassette playing Laurie's kind of spoken song. I was also lucky to see Joan Jonas's performance Mirage in 1976 at Anthology Film Archives. So watching Joan perform this piece, which had projected film performance, on the floor you can see the tic-tac-toe that she drew and then danced over. Joan, in her way, did performances, repeated these performances for a couple of years. She would do them in New York, then she would go to Europe, and then at a point she would say, that's it. And at MoMA, we were fortunate to acquire this as an installation. So what Joan did was, in quote, she locked down the ideas that are the work. So you've got monitors on their side, which she would have had at Anthology. You've got her prop that she was using a lot then, these funnels, which she could use as like a megaphone or as a binocular type thing, or monocular, whatever you call it. So as Hannah's already very carefully gone into, it took 6 or so people at MoMA to process this acquisition. So I worked closely with Joan and then Glenn Wharton, our then conservator, and we interviewed Joan about the aesthetics of the piece, how big it could be, how small it could be, because I'm not there anymore. But we wanted to get all of that information down, and we wanted, archival copies of all of these materials. Thank goodness MoMA stockpiled, I think, over 40 or 50 aspect ratio 4:3 TV sets, monitors. So it's very complicated. And so this little team, registrar, conservator, curator, and a couple more people, the art handler, the person who installs the work, we all sat down before, during, and after. And that's when, after you do a brain dump, you get all of that knowledge now that you have, and you try to dump that into the files, so that goes into the future, the posterity of this piece. So we had MTV appear, and at that point in '81, everybody thought, or some people thought, oh, it's going to be great for artists. Of course, MTV supported only a handful of new productions, but it got, I'm always intrigued by how artists move between video, performance, and their use of music. So I think many of you know Pippoletti Reese. She's Swiss, like many of you are. And I wrote about her in the book. So here she's playing on a Beatles song. Pippoletti is very pretty. So she's playing and distorting this. So I'm sure you can get it on YouTube if you have, I shouldn't say that, but if you wanted to see this. So video and media, I'm always interested how artists are fluid in their movement. Julia Scher has been living in Cologne for, I don't know, 15 years. Julia is a very, I don't know what I would say, canny, cagey, smart artist. Very, very smart. When she was, I think, in university, to earn money, she created a security company, and she would install security cameras, basically in the homes of the women she met at the health club. But she really got into security, and then it became a persona, and then it became her installation MO, modus operandi. So Julia, I always love to, all these people, I love to talk with them, because learning their new ideas, what they're doing with technology, how they feel about it. So Julia is one of those people. Gary Hill also, I met, he's quite a unusual character who never went to art school, did sculpture, and then moved from California to upstate New York and really got into video. Like Bill Viola and the Veselkas, he really got into what is the electronic signal? What is the essence of a video, in quote, artwork? So I got this piece, I showed it, I think in 1990. And then a number of years later, we got it into the collection. So it's 16 little, big, small TV tubes that have been taken out of the housing and the wires that connect the tube to the chassis, which is behind. The long wires are almost like nerve endings. You know, our bodies have many parts for circulation, for picking up information. So Gary's created a kind of memento mori here. And if you don't think this is a simple piece, they're very complicated for conservation and MoMA to keep up. I'll just add one little thing. So the rasters are on a shelf, and the shelf are not at eye level, they're slightly lower. So you, as the viewer, you have to bow in a way to look at this piece. So you physically have to deal with this work on its terms, and that is from this kind of half bent over position. So in Japan, Bill spent a lot of time in Japan, Gary some. So it's kind of an honorific. You're honoring the work by slightly bowing. You want to know about it. So I'll just go quickly now. Cheryl Conkelton, Paola Antonelli, we got MoMA to launch its pilot website. In 1995, very few museums had websites, but the three of us got MoMA to launch a pilot. And then within 2 years, I had a travel grant to go to China. And it's still online, and I hiked the back roads, and I met every media artist there was. Only one had a computer, and this is in my book. So I went from Beijing to Shanghai, Hangzhou, Guangzhou. So I'm very happy to say, I think all of the artists I met, a couple have passed away, sadly, but they're all still very active, including Zhangpei Li, a brilliant artist who did Hygiene #3, where for, I forget, 40 minutes, I forget the length of it, he's washing a chicken. So at that point, 91, China had a hepatitis epidemic, which is not talked about. And so this is of course about control and hygiene and many things. So it's in the MoMA collection. It's a brilliant work. Young artists, I did a show with my colleague, Sally Berger and Stephen Bicciello. The three of us did this show called Young and Restless. Here's a work of our then quite young Cheryl Donegan, where she's drinking the milk coming out of this ghastly green colored plastic container. She gets a mouthful and spits it on the wall like an Abex painting. Let's see if this will work. So anyway, Maria Rosenfeld, I've followed her work for quite a while. This is someone who did undergraduate work at Harvard in music and despised the male-dominated vision of the school. And it wasn't until she got to Cal Arts that she felt she could really breathe. And that's when she made her Sheer Frost Orchestra, a composition for 17 women, each playing an electric guitar. Their choreographed actions made using only nail polish bottles. So it's interesting to see what all of these artists were thinking about and doing. Oops, I don't want to go away. It was interesting to see what Tony Oursler did in 1995 with the newly released tiny video projector. And he went from spinning narratives in his single channel videotapes and his installations with props. And now he created these little sculptures, you, me, them, this particular one. So you had all kinds of psychological drama going on between these two little characters. And they were, what we would say, they were highly desired by contemporary collectors, because finally video had a comfort level in a way that allowed collectors to kind of go towards them, and museums also picked them up. So this is an artist I got to know in Tokyo first in, I forget, in the 80s when he was an art student. And this is, I'm going to stop this sound so it doesn't. Oh, it doesn't want to do that. Let's see, I've got it here twice. Okay. Well, it's got a mind of its own. So anyway, here's Lovers, which he made in 1994. He was part of a group called Dumb Type, and the group consisted of dancers, musicians, electronic savvy artists, and they were phenomenal. Some of them continue, but Teiji was brilliant. And I'm just going to go, because I don't want to. Anyway, I'll just say a few words about Teiji. So that piece called Lovers, I put it into my show called Video Spaces. He died 2 months after the show closed. He had AIDS. He was a very strong activist and bringing AIDS awareness to Japan, the government refused to acknowledge that AIDS was an issue. So I learned so much. Teiji was from Kyoto. I had 2 sabbaticals in Japan. I spent a total of a year there. So I was very honored when Canon, the producer of the piece, Canon Art Lab, Canon gave the work to MoMA. Now that piece is not simple and very complicated. It sat in storage from 1996-7 until after I left the museum, stepped down from the museum. Someone wanted to put it up. And I have to say my poor conservation colleagues worked really hard for a couple of months. And this is a case where the aesthetics of a piece are so tricky. And I believe, even though the conservators and the technical staff are brilliant, they simply did not have the time to really get this piece the way it should have been, but at least it got up, it got some air, and a whole new group of people got to see the work. So I'm always scouting, I'm always looking. So I did see Nalini Milani's piece, Game Pieces 2003 in Istanbul, and then I was able to get it into MoMA. I talked a lot before the acquisition with the sculpture conservator at MoMA about what I should ask Nalini for. And Linda Zuckerman told me the particular mylar I should request, and that I should request the paint she used on the mylar drums. So we worked all of that out, and the piece was sent flat. That was also decided, and it is stored flat, and it went up in a show a couple of years ago. So I'm going to go quickly now because we are running out of time. Cory Arcangel, how artists look at the popular culture, Super Mario, and create a very small but very witty, very funny work. My last show at MoMA was called Soundings, a contemporary score. Creating a show is not easy. You have the politics of your institution. You've got real estate at stake. I was offered an exhibition space. I spent 2 years really thinking about how to make this an appealing show to the visitor. No headphones. I didn't want people to be isolated. I wanted a comfort level. I wanted a minimum of dark galleries. So I got the permission to use a landing way out in front of the gallery space. And Sergei Chepnin did Motor Matter Bench. You can see transducers underneath. So the way Laurie Anderson had the handphone table, here the visitors sat down and their derriere is, the bones in their derriere are what, through bone conduction, they heard. And it was what Sergei had adapted and composed from ambient sound and some other things. I skipped one image, oh well. So you walk down a corridor, and at the end of the corridor was the amazing Camille Norman's Trip Light, where she took a microphone, stripped the guts out of it. So it doesn't have, it's not sonic, it's got a light inside, and it's on a kind of timer. So this light is somewhat pulsating, and it makes you stop and think about where does our voice come from? How do we express our voice? And it comes in a way, starts in the lungs and then it comes up. We have our brain involved too, of course. But anyway, so the shadow on the wall is like a rib cage. So you might think, oh, Billie Holiday used a microphone like that when she performed. And then one of the pieces in the show was indeed a dark room with some light, with very soft seating, with a nice rug on the floor, as there were in all the spaces. and you can hear Ultrafield. It's got 16 speakers that start at kind of floor level and move up. So it's what's called an ambisonic installation. So you begin underwater. Oops, it's going automatically. It's doing what it wants. I'm going to go back. Let's see. Yep. Anyway, so the documentation is very difficult. So I'm showing you this just to say documentation is tough. You really need a good photographer, or you're going to have to explain what your point of view was in the image that you took, however good, bad, or whatever. And that's what people are going to see. So this is an image taken by the artists, and all it does is show you two people in the gallery, maybe three, there's one in the back. Anyway, I'm interested in what artists are doing today. So Rachel Rosen, a young artist who works with VR, is in my podcast series, and already kindly mentioned was my book that came out a year ago. It's sold out. I'm amazed, and they're reprinting with a paperback edition. I'm very happy about that. Once COVID hit a year ago, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I had to abort my book tour. So I started Barbara London Calling, and I interviewed 12 artists. My last question to each one was, do you consider yourself a media artist? Each one said no. Each one is artist, and I take that strongly to heart. So anyway, I think that's it. I think you got a lot of what I've done. Not the whole thing, but anyway, okay, thank you. Oh, thanks.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for the wealth, richness of information, and this really, heterogeneous, transnational mapping of practices, and also like the time spans that your work covers. That was truly beautiful and impressive. I saw that Marco Maria raised his hand. Marco, you had a question, and I think also maybe some people in the, Hannah as well. It was okay. So we'll take Marco's question or comment first, and then Hannah's.
Bonjour, donc j'ai vraiment une question. Je remercie Anna Holling et Barbara London pour leur communication très riche. Et c'est justement sur ça que j'ai une question pour les deux. Parce que ce sont deux générations différentes de témoins du travail sur les arts électroniques, et j'aimerais le demander. Surtout, Anna a présenté des œuvres de Pike exposées aux années 60 et 70 à une petite galerie new-yorkaise, donc ça concerne aussi Barbara, qui est la Bonino Gallery de Fernanda Bonino. C'est une Italienne qui travaillait à New York, qui a été la première galerie qui a donné de confiance à ce jeune artiste qui venait de l'Allemagne. Puisqu'on n'a presque rien d'informations sur la Bonino Gallery, je me demandais s'il y a des études ou quelque chose qu'on peut consulter. Parce qu'il y a seulement des photos, moi j'ai tout le catalogue, mais quand même, cette galerie m'a parlé directement en juin en 90, quand on a organisé son exposition à Rome. Mais la question, à part l'information sur la Bonino Gallery, que je trouve importante, est liée aussi au rôle de Video Art Festival de Locarno, c'est-à-dire une petite galerie en festival dans un lieu de périphérie de l'Europe comme le Tessin. Quel rapport ont avec les grands musées d'art contemporain et leur intérêt pour la vidéo d'artistes? C'est-à-dire, on sait bien que Barbara London a géré le département vidéo art du MoMA et a élargi, étendu l'intérêt pour le film du MoMA. Mais le MoMA doit quelque chose aussi à la Galleria Bonino, aux petites galeries de New York qui étaient les explorateurs des commencements des arts électroniques. Et ça, pour moi, est une question intéressante parce que se dit à tous les lieux de périphérie où les galéristes courageux et curieux qui font de ouverture pour le Grand Musée d'art contemporain et donc pour l'histoire des artistes. Voilà, merci.
Oh, complicated question. So I always feel nobody exists alone. So Maria Gloria Bukowski, who started Arctics 22, was very responsive and supported through production. And Bill Viola was one of the technicians there early on, really helping to bring attention to work, to getting it produced. Several years earlier in Germany, Gary Schum also thought about what is a gallery. And he had, in quote, a TV gallery. And for him, a gallery was not a physical space, it was the airwaves, it was the television. And in, I think, 73, and now her name is out of my head, there was a woman in Cologne who actually also started a gallery. And Fujiko Nakaya in Tokyo created Video Gallery Scan. And she really took it upon herself, like Maria Gloria Bukowski, to bring attention and awareness to this field. So then, by doing that, there becomes, and I'm trying to think who was in London, the Filmmakers Co-op in London, but there was also a video group as well, maybe not a commercial gallery, but so I think in the 70s, there were a number of places where people, very energetic people like Maria Gloria and Fujiko and others, really tried to bring awareness. And we only hope that the archives, and I gather Maria Gloria's archive is in the Venice Biennial, I'm not sure. But Fujiko Nakaya's archive is now being conserved, and I think it's going into a museum. So a scholar like you, if you can make it to Tokyo, you know, you'll be able to, with the help of a translator, dig into those files. So it's a slow process. And I know Hannah has done a lot of research, spent a lot of time and energy going into these files, because and then when the Getty did a big pan LA series of shows about video, contemporary art in Latin America, then the archive of Jorge Glusberg, the archives in Brazil, in different cities. There were festivals actually in Brazil, some very early. And I think Weber Kayan has been to a couple of those festivals. But anyway, those archives, I always said, every shred of paper an artist gave me was important. I saved it. I put it into folders. I had my interns alphabetize it. So when I stepped down, before I stepped down, those files went into the library, and it's kind of like a special collection. So if a scholar is really interested after COVID and the MoMA special collections and the library reopens, then you'll be able to go in. And I do have material because I was in Latin America in the early 80s. I did meet a lot of artists, and they gave me a lot of material, and it's all there. Or Whatever Valley Export gave me in 1974 is there. Or whatever the Italian artists I met, or the catalogs I got from the Locarno Video Festival, or the, material. So to me, I was a curator, but I early on knew I had to really think of the history and the future. And now a PhD student in Pittsburgh is doing his thesis on my legacy. So that's quite something. Anyway.
Hannah, you wanna
Perhaps
respond?
I could chime in to comment a little bit on your question, Marco. Thank you so much. And it's just really, I almost can't add anything because Barbara answered it so eloquently already. But regarding Bonino, I can just say, that I relied on many sources, and that Fernanda Bonino was actually the first of Pike's dealers in the US, and quite an interesting person. She was very kind of interested in the publicity Pike as a person, as a creative mind would bring to her, basically to her site, to her gallery. And Pike was obviously at the time, friends with Mary Baumeister. She was the wife, the second partner, I think, at the time. Later, I think, wife of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and Pike knew her from Cologne, and she would then bring all his downtown avant-garde friends like Kate Pro, John Cage, Merce Cunningham, and so on, Ginsberg, to Bonino. So I think it is a very important site of research for all of us. I can also add to, Barbara very expansive list already, that in Germany, Rudolf Jähling should be someone whom we all have to keep on our research maps, because he was the one that kind of enabled his his private space to become a site for art shows, the proto Fluxus that happened in Germany, during the early 1960s, and then the exposition of music, electronic television takes place in his private space, in a way, in this villa in Wuppertal. So, just one of the sites. And I want to expand and perhaps go to my question a little bit on what Barbara said, that that it is so important that archives are basically, as I see them, and perhaps I was trying to explain it already in my conception of the archives. Archives are never alone, only material, kind of, conglomeration of material traces. There are also people that animate them, the knowledge, the skills, the eloquence, the memories, all this kind of perhaps immaterial aspect or dimension of the archive that is so important to kind of actualize the works, the facts that happened back then, and bring them again to the kind of presence in which we are. And I am just thrilled by the project, the Locarno Art Festival, because it does exactly this. It has a very, very rich material archive, which I just glimpsed online, and tries to actualize, the knowledge through bringing these brilliant minds together. And this is something that, for me, it's like an embodiment of this idea. And Barbara, I think, I'm thrilled that this PhD student works on your legacy, because I think you are like the living, embodiment of these times and many times afterwards, that this knowledge needs to be recorded in some ways. My question relates just to this, because you mentioned that, that there was this experience that was so important to many of this early Pike's works specifically. I am a Pikean. I will not kind of try to hide it. I'm a huge Pike fan, and of his works and how they were mediated then through the years. And basically, one of the works that you shown was this Zen for, I don't know if it was Zen for sound, but the title does not come to my mind right now, but it was shown in Wuppertal, back then in 1963. And you said that this experience, the kind of primary experience, was so important. And I believe that the accounts of your experience of those early works is really invaluable to the work and to how we might understand it right now. I kind of think this through the what Hannah Higgins said, that if a piece is not about stuff but is actually them, no? Hannah Higgins, the Fluxus scholar that wrote Fluxus Experience. So if the piece is not about things but actually is them, then the signifying, in a way, chain applies to visual arts needs to be modified, no? And to make the kind of physical or actual experience central. And this work, I believe, and many other Fluxus works, or the works that you've shown us, problematizes this kind of Western metaphysics, no? Which separated primary experience, so the feel of the work, as you said, from the secondary experience, that is this kind of mental, perhaps, concept about this. And I wonder how you might, what would be your recommendation of the recovery, for the recovery of this primary, this first experience? What can we do, in nowadays, in contemporaneity, to get the feel of the work, how it was back then, or yeah.
Well, it's a very complicated problem, complicated issue, and I think you have to document in all kinds of ways, so that maybe one of them is not perfect, or in future. But I think as long as someone is alive, to try to nail them down to a chair and interview them. And I think that's what MoMA has tried to do, ever since Glenn Wharton was there. The artist interview is so important. But well, I have to say, I've had some very bad experiences. I went to see a recreation of a Butoh performance by Hijikata, and it was terrible. And this was, years after he made this work. And it really was a terrible performance, but yet, 40 students were there, and this is going to be their image of the work. And if they're art historians, they're going to go off into the future with that as their experience. So hopefully, if one of them is a writer and, like you, is doing the in-depth research, then they're going to go and they're going to interview other people. They're going to go and interview the performers who were around him, or and we'll go into what his legacy was. But I think Gary Hill, the piece I showed, which is really, really beautiful, very moving, very mesmerizing. When it was up, whenever it was up at MoMA, I would find a cluster of people stuck like glue to that piece, because it's so haunting, it's so gorgeous, it's so simple. But when TV tubes no longer exist, I did get in several full sets of the TV tubes so that the piece would have a life. But I would have conversations with Gary and with the conservators and with the registrar that ultimately this piece will die, because it cannot be on a, whatever you call it, a 16:9 aspect ratio. It cannot be on a flat screen. It really needs the feeling of a monitor, which is very terrarium-like. It's like you've got the body in there represented, and so then it's very sad. But indeed, from the Renaissance, we've lost a lot of things, So we have to try our best to get many different forms of documentation down, but there are many great artists out there living, and sadly some who have passed, like Teiji Furuhashi or Peg himself. We have to do our best, and unfortunately, not everyone is taken care of. And then, is the artist taking good care of the work? I remember once talking with Paul DeMarinis, a very interesting sound artist and performer, and I said, "Oh, how are you dealing with it?" And he does very software-driven sound work, and he said, "I'm very bad at it, because the work I made 25, 30 years ago, I'm not going to go back in myself and redo all that software. So those works are gone. And he's most interested in what you may have seen more recently in shows in Europe and different places. So that's what will maybe live on. Or maybe there will be someone like you who will go in and work on the software and try to reconstitute something. But then, like Paik, with that piece in Frankfurt, when that piece in the Museum of Modern Art in Frankfurt, it's already gone through 3 upgrades. The first 2, Paik was alive, and he said, okay, my preference is the 3-tube RGB, whatever, projector. And then, okay, you can have the digital version. And of course that changes the look. And then Paik's former assistant became the one to really oversee the upgrade of the final. So are we happy with it? I think so, you know, but did Frankfurt interview Namjoon? Do they have their production files from the making of it? That museum director was phenomenal, who was the one who commissioned the piece, who used building construction funds to pay for that work. And I think that's what museums, the director, the curator, you go to the ends of the earth to get the money together for the acquisition, especially of a brand new work where you don't know if it's going to succeed or fail. And in that case, it's a very brilliant, beautiful work. But I say it's gone through several upgrades, and one since his death. So, and then, you know, maybe not all assistants are as good as Johan is for Paik, you know, and maybe, you know, I could go on and on. So we have to either have blind faith, blind trust, you know, what to say. But indeed, archives and documentation is so important.
Just trying to
Thank you,
Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Be mindful. Oh, sorry, Hannah. You wanted to add something, or because we're running a little bit late, but the conversation is already quite rich, and I think there'll be a lot more to say this afternoon about the role of documenting, archiving. And that's also something that the research and the Video Art Festival is confronted to. And I think, yeah, I can already see various directions in how to approach these questions based on what's been said this morning.